When we think of the ongoing Russia-Ukrainian war, one iconic piece of hardware springs to mind, the infamous, ever-reliable AK. And while it is certainly apt that the most ferocious post-Soviet conflict should come to be defined by the most iconic Soviet firearm, it is far from the only weapon to see service on the front lines of the conflict. Many of these are quite expected and normal things. M16s donated by the US, as well as Dragunovs pulled from Soviet stockpiles and things like that. But some of them are unexpected to the point of being downright bizarre. And it is exactly those weapons that we're interested in today, so let's go. The Russo-Ukrainian War is often dubbed the first 21st century war, a description intended to represent various new technological aspects of warfare that are coming together in their first major conflict. This description is apt in many ways, but in others, it could not be further from the truth, as some weapons in the conflict are quite literally antiques. Chief among them would be the Maxim Gun, a machine gun originally designed back in 1884. This weapon, the first true machine gun, was revolutionary for its time, delivering a volume of fire so heavy, so accurate, and so reliably that it completely outmatched anything that came before. Naturally then, the major powers of the day raced to adopt the weapon for themselves, with Imperial Russia being no exception, who duly adopted it in August 1910, dubbing their variant the PM1910. It remained in service in the Soviet period until it was eventually deemed obsolete post-World War II, after which they were all lathered in grease, placed into storage crates, and secreted in warehouses across the Soviet Union. This left 35 Maxims in Ukraine following the collapse of the Union in 1991, and with them still being perfectly functional machine guns, it was deemed necessary to press them back into service following Russia's initial invasion in 2014, with them being officially readopted in 2016, over 60 years after they were initially deemed obsolete. And remember, 1884. One might be tempted to dismiss these revived Maxims as nothing but relics of a bygone era, press-ganged into service during a time of national crisis, but this would be incorrect because, surprisingly, it seems to be performing pretty well. The water-cooled design of the Maxim, while certainly cumbersome compared to modern air-cooled designs, allows it to achieve a sustained rate of fire that those modern machine guns simply can't match, making it a perfect weapon for situations where mobility is a minimal priority but volume of fire is a maximum one, such as in trenches or on vehicles. As if the sight of a 19th century machine gun on a 21st century battlefield wasn't bizarre enough, the Ukrainians have also taken to modifying their Maxims with a plethora of modern attachments. Take this example, which has been modified with a suppressor, some kind of AR-like stock, a relatively meaty-looking optic, and a normal pistol grip and trigger, as opposed to the original push-button trigger. But the ingenuity does not stop there, as the Ukrainians have also created dual and quad mounts for their Maxims. These mounting systems may look a bit ridiculous, but they are actually ingenious contraptions, as the extra volume of fire coupled with the Maxim's near unmatched capabilities for sustained fire have proven to be exceptional at handling low-flying drones. The operator simply has to weld their finger to the trigger and correct their fire until the drone disappears, rather than having to interrupt their fire to prevent the barrel from overheating. Now, this intersection of old and new is certainly interesting, but the Maxim is only one of many antique weapons that have found their way to the front lines of Ukraine. So now, let's discuss another one. So the MP40 was Germany's go-to submachine gun for most of World War II. Firing from an open bolt and largely constructed from stamped steel, it was simple and easy to produce, and it satisfied the German war machine's insatiable demand for submachine guns without sacrificing reliability or quality. To this end, it was successful, and following its introduction in 1940, operators often lauded the merits of the weapon. The Soviet Union captured tens of thousands of MP40s as they drove the Germans back to Berlin, and as we saw when we looked at the Maxim, the Soviets were hardly ones to let perfectly serviceable firearms go to waste, and so at the end of the war, the captured MP40s were put into storage, just in case they were ever needed. Naturally, then, these stocks of MP40s, just like the Maxims, became ripe for the picking when war came to Ukraine. But unlike the Maxim, which was formally adopted back into service by the Ukrainian military, no such process appears to have taken place for the MP40, and its return to service appears to have been on a much more ad hoc basis, with caches of them being liberated and pushed into service as and when the situation demands it. It being a localized process also means we have significantly less information to work with our only real sources being the occasional photos of the weapon that find find their way to social media, like the one we're showing on screen now. This was originally uploaded on the 22nd of July 2022, and the photo shows a member of the Donbass People's Militia holding an MP40, which is claimed to have been taken from recently surrendered Ukrainian forces. We have no idea whether this origin is true because we only have the uploader's claim to work with, but it does at least appear to be credible, as the soldier in the image seemingly has no pouches on his assault vest that could accommodate an MP40 magazine, very much implying that this isn't his issued weapon. Another such photo is uploaded on the 21st of March 2022. This one claimed to be showing a selection of weapons captured from Ukrainian defenders during the Battle of Hostomel Airport, and on the left we can very clearly see an MP40. As with the previous photo, we have no supplementary evidence to gather further insight from, so we're left only to speculate. But with this photo being uploaded so close to the outbreak of hostilities, it seems reasonable to assume that this one was taken from stores on an ad hoc basis, as we initially asserted. So, really, we are left scratching our heads when it comes to the MP40. We know that some are in circulation in Ukraine, and we know their likely source, but beyond that, there are few solid conclusions we can come to. But the MP40 is not the only World War II-era submachine gun to find its way to the front lines of Ukraine. So now let's talk about the venerable Thompson. The Thompson submachine gun, colloquially known as the Tommy gun, was an American premier submachine gun during World War II. First produced in 1921, it was predominantly constructed from expensive milled steel and utilized finely machined parts, making it a bit of a Rolls-Royce of a machine gun that had no expense spared in its design and construction. It has achieved fame that few firearms can match, thanks to its service in World War II, its use by gangsters in the Prohibition era, and the many movies chronicling both of those things. But how did it get to Ukraine? That question is much harder to answer for the Thompson than it was for the MP40, and many possibilities exist, with there being no clear answer. The Americans did send nearly 138,000 Thompsons to the Soviets as part of the Lend-Lease program, meaning that they could be put into storage only to later re-emerge like the Maxim and the MP40. This is certainly a credible explanation, but unlike with the MP40, we cannot assume this to be wholly true, because the Thompson has a habit of reliably appearing in every world conflict in notable quantities, implying an intentional worldwide proliferation beyond simple convenience circumstances. As for specific evidence for their proliferation in Ukraine, this video was posted on the 10th of April 2022 and shows Chechen Russians displaying a cache of weapons they claim to have captured from recently defeated Ukrainian troops in Mariupol, at the bottom of which can be seen a Thompson. There's also this photo, which appeared on a pro-Russian Telegram chat on the 13th of May 2022, again taken in Mariupol. The emergence of at least two Thompsons in the same city at around the same time does at least serve to indicate some kind of reasonably widespread proliferation, be it acquisition from a former Soviet cache or an arms shipment from elsewhere, but beyond that, there isn't much more we can ascertain from these sources, leaving us to rather scratch our heads and just make educated guesses again. So now the PPS, one of the lesser appreciated firearms of World War II, and it was a Soviet submachine gun designed in Leningrad in 1942 when an ever-tightening joint German, Italian, and Finnish siege created an insatiable need for cheap and cheerful firearms that could be produced within the besieged city. The result was a simple but deadly weapon that only took 3 hours or so to manufacture, thanks in large part to its largely stamped steel construction and the omission of any and all creative flair or quirkiness from its design. Thanks to this simplicity, over 2 million of them were produced by the end of the war, and like the Maxim, they soldiered on in the post-war world, eventually being usurped by the more opulent and advanced AK series of rifles. And you know something is crude when an AK seems advanced by comparison. Then they were put into storage across the Soviet Union, again, just in case. Naturally then, they have come out of hiding to serve once again on the Ukrainian front lines, but like the MP40, it does not appear as though their re-emergence has been a widespread initiative, with it instead seeming to be an ad hoc case-by-case thing to arm militias and reserve units when more modern alternatives are unavailable. We're also able to assert this with some reasonable certainty in this instance because unlike the MP40, there is no shortage of photos of the PPS in use, allowing us to note recurring trends and patterns in where we see it. The first photo of interest, this comes from the 25th of February 2022, only one day after the Russian invasion. On the left, we can clearly see a PPS in the hands of an irregular combatant. The fact that this photo emerged so soon vindicates our our hypothesis of them being procured on an ad hoc basis, because within the first 24 hours of the invasion, the Kiev government almost certainly had more pressing concerns than distributing caches of old PPSs. Given the date of this image, it is also possible that this PPS was a criminal firearm already in circulation at the time of the invasion, one whose owner decided to use it for more patriotic purposes, but ultimately we've got no way of confirming that hypothesis. Another interesting photo of a PPS emerged on a pro-Ukrainian Telegram channel in December 2022. Now, we mustn't get carried away with this photo because the PPS, along with a similarly aged SVT-40 being held by significantly better equipped regular troops, may be tempting to conclude that the PPS has found its way to first-line service in Ukraine, but alas, there are a few giveaways in this image that tell us to temper our conclusions. For starters, the soldier with the PPS does not appear to be wearing pouches that would handily hold its magazines, and similarly, the soldier on the right can be seen with AK-47 magazines, not magazines for an SVT-40. So, clearly, these are not their issued weapons. More likely, the two men pictured simply came across them, thought they were cool, so stopped to take a quick photo. But this does at least tell us that the PPS is out there, in circulation again, likely with irregular units. And then there's this photo. If you've been following the war at all, you have probably seen this photo, likely being reported as being from the current hostilities. Unfortunately, it's nothing of the sort. This photo is chronically misreported and, in fact, was taken all the way back in 2014. Despite its age, however, this photo still has utility, as it features a pro-Russian Donbass separatist, and we lack later photos of such forces using the PPS. But it at least tells us the weapon has been in use with Russian forces at some point, and it therefore stands to reason that it still is, because based on the pattern of firearms usage we've seen thus far, why wouldn't it be? So, with our examination of the PPS done, let's move on to a weird weapon that is much, much newer. The FN F2000 made its debut in 2001, developed by the Belgian arms manufacturer FN Herstal. It was intended to be a new rifle for a new millennium, incorporating a swath of new and improved features that would firmly raise the bar and set new standards going forward. Its most distinctive feature is its bullpup configuration, a design that situates the gun's action and magazine well behind the trigger, providing for a more compact firearm without sacrificing barrel length. Normally, such firearms are not ambidextrous, as the configuration places the ejection port right at the back of the rifle and therefore right next to the face of the operator if fired from the wrong hand. But the F2000, as the innovative trailblazer it was intended to be, it incorporated a unique forward-facing ejection port, completely bypassing this problem. Other advanced features include a nearly completely sealed system that meant it could withstand levels of dirt and punishment that would leave an AK feeling nervous, as well as a polymer construction that greatly reduced its weight. But it was not meant to be. The F2000 was a total flop, and the rifle of the future quickly became the rifle of the past. Most of the unsold rifles sat gathering dust in storage, only to see the light of day in May 2022 when the Belgian government announced plans to send 10,000 rifles to Ukraine, and so they came cap in hand to FN to see what they had on hand. Naturally, this was a great chance for them to get rid of some of their old stock, and so an unknown number of F2000s were packaged up and sent over to Ukraine. Notably, all of the F2000s pictured in Ukraine thus far have been standard models, which can be identified by a giveaway integrated optic, implying that neither the Belgian government nor FN is wanting to get rid of their best stock just yet. It's also possible that Ukraine has been supplied F2000 rifles from Slovenia, the only country to adopt the F2000 as its service rifle, but this is highly unlikely for two reasons. Firstly, Slovenia only purchased 6,500 of them to equip its modestly sized army, so it's unlikely that it has any to spare, and secondly, the variant used by Slovenia is the F2000S, which sports an easy-to-recognize Picatinny rail perched atop it. So, we've seen both old and new weird weapons that have found their way to Ukraine front lines, so let's now move on and look at the improvised ones. A mortar is a simple, indirect fire weapon. It consists of a little but hollow tube with a firing pin at the bottom. Its projectile is typically a fin-stabilized explosive which is dropped down the tube, which then hits the bottom, hitting its primer against the aforementioned firing pin, which then propels the projectile out of the tube at a steep angle, back down towards the earth, and then it detonates. The utility of such a weapon is obvious. Firing while out of line of sight can only be a big and clever idea after all, but it can also be rather inaccurate. So what if you wanted to fire a mortar round at the enemy with better accuracy? Well, you'd weld it to an RPG motor, of course, something that both the Ukrainians and the Russians have been doing in earnest. Now, this is not a new idea. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard has been known to craft RPG Mortar hybrids for decades now, and similarly, communist insurgents were known to fashion such weapons during the Central American crisis, but it does seem to have really come into its own during the current conflict, with such weapons now appearing at previously unimaginable rates. Interestingly, the fusion of mortars and RPGs isn't as dangerous as it might seem at first glance. The secret lies in the intricate fuse mechanisms built into many mortars. These fuses are acceleration sensitive, meaning that they need to hit a specific speed before they're primed and able to detonate. This threshold is usually set so that the round won't detonate if the rocket motor fails and it lands too close to the operator or goes off course and hits something unexpected, similarly close to the operator. But what of their specific use on the Ukrainian front lines? As evidence, we have these photos showing them being test-fired by Ukrainian forces in March of this year. We also have plenty of footage of them being used in combat, such as this instance from May of this year, showing 2 RPG mortars being fired from an improvised tandem mounting. And then there's also this footage from June showing one being discharged from a traditional shoulder-held launcher in an urban environment. These sources are just the tip of the iceberg, and thus we are able to ascertain that RPG mortar hybrids are reasonably common in Ukrainian use. But what about the Russians? Well, this is where it gets interesting, because there is evidence of them being used during the separatist insurgency that preceded the Russian invasion, such as this photo, which emerged in May 2016, but we were unable to uncover any photographs or footage that showed them being used since the full-scale invasion began in February 2022. Of course, this could just mean that we were unable to find them, but more likely it would suggest that they've fallen out of use for whatever reason. And that's where we end today's video. We hope you enjoyed the unusual weapons. I'll see you next time.